It was November 14th, 2019. The city of Chicago was drenched in a cold, persistent rain on a Tuesday that should have faded into memory like any other. But inside a warm, expensive bistro, that peace was shattered when three men carrying guns burst through the door. They came for cash, and they came to inspire fear, expecting both without a fight. They found their money, and they saw the terror they wanted in the eyes of nearly everyone. But one person refused to be a victim. In surveillance footage that would later spread like wildfire, a lone waitress stood just inches from the muzzle of a loaded .45 caliber handgun. She was pouring an espresso with a steady hand, not letting a single drop escape the cup. The internet would later name her the Ice Queen. But for Lorenzo Moretti, the city's most feared man who was observing from a shadowy back table, she was not some brave hero. She was an impossible mystery. He understood that such profound stillness in the face of death is not born from courage. It is forged in a history written in darkness and blood. This story is a powerful reminder that your darkest chapter does not define your ending. It is proof that a woman who has lost everything can still rise to become the most dangerous force in any room. If you have ever felt invisible, underestimated, or broken beyond repair, this story was made for you. Stay until the very end, because Harper's final decision will change the way you see your own strength. If this kind of story speaks to your soul, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new one. Now, let us begin. This is the chronicle of how one woman's profound composure in the face of violence would ultimately ignite a war. The entire event unfolded at the Gilded Fork, a restaurant that catered to an elite clientele tucked away in Chicago's River North District. It was a place for quiet deals between powerful men, where politicians and mobsters could speak freely under lighting designed to hide the truth in their eyes. In this world, Harper Caroline, a young woman of 24, was meant to be completely invisible. Her entire job depended on it. She was far more than a waitress. She had perfected the art of becoming part of the scenery. Her unremarkable brown hair was always constrained in a tight bun. She wore no trace of makeup, and her gaze was consistently directed at the floor. To the wealthy patrons, she was nothing more than a functional pair of hands that delivered their expensive risotto and silently refilled their glasses of wine. For her boss, she was the ideal worker, someone who never called in sick and was willing to be paid in cash, no questions asked. On this specific evening, however, the delicate balance of the restaurant's hidden world was about to be broken. Seated in the most strategic booth, Table 14, which offered a clear line of sight to both the front and back exits, was Lorenzo Moretti. At just 32 years old, Moretti had become the head of the powerful Moretti crime family, a position he claimed after his father was assassinated 2 years before. Rumors insisted he never slept, and dressed in his custom-tailored charcoal suit, he looked the part of a man haunted by constant vigilance. He was slowly sipping from a glass of sparkling water, but his gaze was sharp, methodically sweeping across the room with the lethal focus of a hawk searching for prey. He was flanked by a pair of bodyguards, immense men who appeared to have been sculpted from solid granite. Lorenzo had no interest in the restaurant's famous food. He was there for a meeting, waiting for a courier, and his patience was wearing thin. Then, at 8:14 p.m., the heavy glass of the front door exploded inward. This was not a precise, tactical entry. It was an act of pure, brutal force. Three figures wearing ski masks poured into the room, brandishing crude shotguns and pistols. The shattering glass instantly killed the comfortable murmur of dinner conversation, plunging the room into a dead silence. "Everybody get down on the floor right now! Put your phones on the table!" the man in charge shouted, his voice high and unsteady with a raw, unprofessional dose of adrenaline. The restaurant immediately descended into absolute chaos. Near the front window, a woman let out a terrified, high-pitched scream. A businessman in an expensive suit made a panicked dive under his table, clumsily tipping over a bottle of fine red wine that spilled and spread across the floorboards like a pool of fresh blood. Throughout all of this, Harper remained perfectly still behind the polished mahogany counter, stationed at the espresso machine. She had just finished locking the coffee filter into place. The violent explosion from the front door did not make her so much as twitch. The small porcelain cup in her hand did not shake. She made no sound at all. The leader of the thieves, an agitated man in a worn-out hooded sweatshirt, stalked towards the cash register, waving his pistol around erratically. "Open it up! Open the damn register!" he screamed at the manager. The manager was a heavy-set man named Mr. Henderson, who was at that moment struggling to breathe on the floor, paralyzed by fear. When it was clear Henderson was useless, the gunman redirected his attention to Harper. He leaped over the counter with surprising speed, jamming the cold steel barrel of his gun hard against her cheek. The metal felt cold and damp from the night's rain. "You open this register, or I swear I will paint these walls with what's inside your head." What happened next would become a subject of intense debate for criminal profilers and internet detectives for months to come. Harper did not let out a gasp of fear. She did not plead with him to spare her life. Instead, she very slowly turned her head, allowing the gun barrel to drag unpleasantly across her skin until she was looking the armed robber directly in his eyes. If anyone had been able to monitor her heart rate, they would have found it had barely increased. "The key is located under the counter, on the left side," she stated. Her voice was completely even, almost robotic in its lack of emotion. She sounded less like a victim and more like a weary employee reciting the store's policy on returns. "If you fire that gun," she continued calmly, "the sound will trip the silent alarm because of the decibel sensors we have installed. But if you just grab the cash and leave, you will have exactly 90 seconds before the patrol car that sits on 4th Avenue is able to respond to the broken window." The gunman was stunned into silence. The sheer detail of her information seemed to short-circuit his violent intentions. "What?" was all he could manage to whisper. "You are wasting your time," Harper said flatly. She then turned her focus back to the espresso machine. She pressed the button to start the brew, and the machine hummed to life. "Move," she commanded, physically nudging the armed man aside with her hip so she could get to the pitcher of milk. From his vantage point in the back of the room, Lorenzo Moretti watched the entire exchange unfold. His own hand was hidden inside his suit jacket, clutching the grip of a silenced pistol. He was prepared to eliminate the threat if they moved toward his table. But he waited. He had personally witnessed trained killers shake before a job. He had watched soldiers say their final prayers before going into a fight. But he had never, in his entire life, seen a civilian waitress handle a life-or-death robbery as if it were a minor interruption to her shift. "She is not counting down the seconds until she dies," Lorenzo realized with a chill. His eyes narrowed with intense focus. "She is timing them." The robbers, now completely thrown off by this bizarre lack of fear and the waitress's unexpected authority, hastily grabbed the entire cash drawer and scooped up the phones from the tables nearest to the door. They were gone in exactly 80 seconds, just as she seemed to know they would be. As the front door swung shut behind them, the sound of approaching sirens began to cut through the night, precisely on schedule. The restaurant finally erupted with the chaos that had been held at bay. People began to sob uncontrollably, others frantically dialed 911, and strangers hugged each other for comfort. Harper Caroline, however, simply picked up the freshly brewed espresso. She walked calmly from behind the counter, moved across the debris-strewn floor, and placed the small cup delicately on table 14. "Your double espresso, sir," she said to Lorenzo, her voice still perfectly level. "This one is on the house. My apologies for the interruption." Lorenzo stared down at the steaming, aromatic cup, then slowly lifted his gaze to her face. Her eyes were dark, almost like empty pools, and they held absolutely no trace of fear. "Who are you?" Lorenzo asked, his voice a low and dangerous rumble. "I am just a waitress," she answered, already turning to walk away from his table. "A waitress," he mused aloud, "who happens to know the precise response time of the 4th Avenue Patrol Unit." Harper paused for a fraction of a second, but did not turn back to face him. I watch a lot of police dramas. Lorenzo watched her disappear into the kitchen. He raised the cup to his lips and took a small sip. The espresso was flawless, and he knew, with a gut instinct that had kept him alive in the criminal world for over a decade, that Harper Caroline was by far the most dangerous person in that entire restaurant. The police arrived on the scene 3 minutes later, flooding the area with disorienting flashes of red and blue light that reflected off the wet street. Detective Miller, a seasoned veteran of the Chicago Police Department with a weary mustache and a prominent coffee stain on his tie, was the one in charge. He began the process of taking official statements. The witnesses were mostly hysterical and unreliable. The businessman who had spilled the wine now insisted that the robbers were armed with military-grade machine guns. Mr. Henderson, the manager, claimed they had made off with over $1 million in cash. But when Detective Miller finally got around to interviewing Harper, he found the experience deeply unsatisfying. "Could you walk me through this one more time, Miss Caroline?" Miller said with a heavy sigh, clicking his ballpoint pen repeatedly. 3 men, all Caucasian. Their heights were approximately 5'10", 6 foot even, and 5'8", Harper recited without emotion. She was sitting on a wooden crate in the dark alley behind the restaurant, smoking a cigarette with perfectly steady hands. The one in charge had a noticeable twitch in his left eye. It suggests a withdrawal from methamphetamines, most likely. The weapon he held was a Colt 1911, but its safety mechanism was engaged the entire time. He had no idea how to operate it. Miller stopped his note-taking. He looked up at her, truly seeing her for the first time. "You are telling me you could see that the safety was on?" "It is a very distinct lever," she replied with a shrug. "It is rather difficult to miss when it is being pressed against your cheek." "Do you have any experience in the military or law enforcement?" the detective pressed. "I was a librarian before I took this job," she lied. The falsehood rolled off her tongue as effortlessly as the smoke she calmly exhaled into the night air. "I just read a lot of books about firearms." Miller was certain she was not telling the truth, but he had no evidence to detain her. She was officially a victim of a crime. She was an unnervingly composed victim, to be sure, but still a victim in the eyes of the law. Back inside the restaurant, Lorenzo Moretti was also technically considered a victim. However, the police officers treated him with a careful, cautious respect that they always reserved for the city's most powerful crime lords. He flatly refused to provide an official statement, letting them know his lawyers were already on their way to deal with the inconvenience. As a uniformed officer escorted Lorenzo to his waiting armored sport utility vehicle, he pulled out his phone and made a single call. "Marcus," Lorenzo spoke into the device, "I need you to run a background check for me. This is your top priority." "What is the name?" Marcus, his most trusted advisor and information specialist, asked from the other end. "Harper Caroline. She is an employee at the Gilded Fork. I want you to find out where she lives, where she came from, every detail. I need to know who she really is." "I am on it, boss. Did the deal fall through?" "The deal never happened," Lorenzo replied, "but something far more compelling occurred." Lorenzo ended the call. As his vehicle moved away from the curb, he stared at Harper through the heavily tinted window. She was walking home alone in the downpour, and he saw her wave away a paramedic who tried to offer her an umbrella. She appeared so small and vulnerable in that moment, but he had already glimpsed the ferocious tiger hiding just beneath the surface. By the following morning, the entire situation had changed dramatically. The surveillance footage had been leaked. An employee at the security firm, hoping to make some quick money from a gossip website or a shock video platform, had sold the digital tape. By 9 a.m., the video, now titled "Waitress Ignores Gunman to Make Coffee," had already accumulated 4 million views. The internet erupted in speculation and awe. One user commented, "She did not even blink an eye. Is she some kind of robot?" Another user wrote, "That is not courage, that is a trauma response. She has clearly seen horrible things before." A third comment simply read, "She is the most composed person in 2019, a complete legend." But in his sprawling penthouse apartment that overlooked Lake Michigan, Lorenzo Moretti was not scrolling through online comments. He was carefully reading through a file that Marcus had just delivered and placed on his desk. "The file is thin, Lorenzo," Marcus said, anxiously pacing across the expensive rug. "It is far too thin to be real." The official record stated that Harper Caroline was born in Ohio. Her social security number was only issued 3 years ago. There was absolutely no credit history for her prior to 2016, no high school yearbook pictures, no listed family members, nothing. "This is a fabricated identity," Lorenzo said, tapping a finger on the thin stack of papers. "It is a very well-made one, but it does not stand up to real investigation." "If she is a federal agent, she is the most convincing actor I have ever witnessed," Marcus commented. "Federal agents do not let someone get that close with a loaded gun without even flinching. What we saw last night, that was something entirely different." "That woman is no federal agent," Lorenzo declared, rising from his chair to gaze out the window. "A government agent would have attempted to calm the situation or play the hero. She was completely indifferent. She looked at the gunman as if he were nothing more than an insect. So who is she then? A rival organization? Perhaps a contract killer living off the grid? That is precisely what we need to uncover." Lorenzo faced Marcus again. "The footage is spreading across the internet like a wildfire. If she's hiding from someone powerful, her anonymity just went up in smoke. The people she is running from are going to see her face on every news channel before this afternoon. She is a dangerous variable," Marcus cautioned. "No," Lorenzo corrected him, a faint, chilling smile touching his lips. "She is a resource. Find her and bring her to me." In the meantime, inside a rundown studio apartment on the south side of Chicago, Harper was packing her life away. This was not the frantic packing of a panicked woman. This was the methodical packing of an expert. She had a single bag filled with cash, a set of 3 different passports, a Glock 26 that had been secured with tape beneath the kitchen sink, and 1 spare set of clothes. She had already seen the news reports. Her image was plastered everywhere. The identity of Harper Caroline was officially compromised. "Stupid," she muttered under her breath, securing the pistol in a holster at the small of her back. "You became complacent. You should have just screamed like everyone else." She had carefully constructed this quiet life over 3 long years. 3 years of absolute silence. She had spent 3 years cleaning toilets and serving bowls of pasta, trying to wash away the memory of blood that stained her hands. Now, it was all gone. It was all over because she could not force herself to be afraid of some desperate addict holding a rusted pistol. With a sigh, she picked up her duffel bag and pulled open the door to her apartment. 2 men dressed in expensive suits were blocking the hallway. They were definitely not police officers. They were also not the people she had been running from for years. Her old enemies would have simply fired their weapons through the door. These men, however, wore the distinct Moretti family crest as pins on their lapels. "Miss Caroline," the larger of the 2 men spoke, his voice deep. "Mr. Moretti wishes to speak with you." Harper's hand moved a fraction of an inch toward the weapon on her back. She quickly ran the calculations in her head. There were 2 of them, both at very close range. She was confident she could neutralize them both before they could even draw their own weapons, but doing so would mean starting a war with the entire Moretti family. She already had more than enough enemies hunting her. She forced the tension out of her shoulders and put on her frightened waitress disguise one last time, even though she knew the mask was beginning to fail her. "Am I in some kind of trouble?" she asked, making her voice tremble just enough. "Only if you decline our invitation," the man answered calmly. Harper stood motionless for a moment. If she made a run for it, she would be hunted by everyone. If she went willingly with Moretti, she was stepping directly into the lion's den. But lions, at least, were creatures of habit. The phantoms from her past were anything but predictable. "All right," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "Let me just get my coat." She took a step back into her apartment, but she did not reach for a coat. Instead, she quietly checked the chamber of her pistol, drew in one long, steadying breath, and then walked back out to face the men who were about to deliver her to the devil himself. The drive was completely silent. They escorted her to the spire, the towering headquarters of the Moretti operation, cleverly disguised as a five-star luxury hotel. They avoided the main lobby entirely, using a private service elevator that went directly to the penthouse suite. When the polished steel doors slid open, Lorenzo was there waiting. He was seated in a massive leather armchair, with the entire glittering Chicago skyline framed behind him. He made no move to stand. "Harper Caroline," Lorenzo said, as if tasting the sound of her name. "Or whatever name you are actually using." Harper let the bag drop to the floor. At that moment, she let the entire act fall away. She stood up straight, her posture transforming from the weary slump of a service worker into the hard, disciplined stance of a trained soldier. "What is it you want, Moretti?" A flicker of interest appeared in Lorenzo's eyes. He clearly preferred this version of her. "I find myself with a problem," Lorenzo explained, gesturing toward the empty chair that faced him. "I have a very important shipment arriving next week. It is incredibly high in value, and the situation surrounding it is extremely delicate. I require someone to manage the exchange. I need a person who does not freeze up when a gun is pointed in their face. Someone who is observant enough to notice when the safety is still on." "I am a waitress," she stated, her tone flat and empty. "You are a liar," Lorenzo shot back. "And as of this morning, you are a liar who has more than 4 million views on YouTube. Furthermore, my sources inform me that certain people in Naples are showing a great deal of interest in that particular video. It seems they think they recognize your face." A chill ran down Harper's spine. Naples? He actually knew. "I can offer you protection," Lorenzo said, leaning forward in his chair. "I can have the entire internet scrubbed clean, bury every copy of that footage, and provide you with a brand new identity. A real one this time." "And in return?" she asked. "You will work for me." Harper stared at him. He had a cruel, sharp kind of beauty, but she was not looking at a man anymore. She was looking at a shield. "If I agree to work for you," Harper said, her voice sinking to a quiet whisper that still managed to fill the cavernous room, "people are going to die." Lorenzo's lips curved into a smile. "I am certainly counting on it." The quiet in the penthouse was thick and heavy, the type of stillness that often comes just before the sound of a gunshot. Heavy rain beat against the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, smearing the brilliant lights of Chicago into long streaks of liquid gold and deep blood red. Harper Caroline remained motionless in the middle of the room, her worn-out duffel bag resting by her feet. She had not shifted her position since Lorenzo Moretti had presented her with his job offer. Her thoughts were moving at lightning speed, processing simulations of every possible future. "You are assessing the room again," Lorenzo noted aloud. He moved toward a crystal decanter that sat on a sidebar. His every motion was smooth, like a predator. "You have glanced at the balcony door no less than 3 times. You are trying to determine if that glass is capable of stopping a bullet." "It is. It is laminated polycarbonate," Harper corrected him, her voice quiet but firm. "That is the standard material for high-risk individuals. However, the frame is made of aluminum. If I were to shoot the hinges, the entire pane of glass would fall out." "That is not a wall, Mr. Moretti. It is just a very heavy curtain." Lorenzo froze, the amber whiskey in his glass swirling as he paused in the middle of his pour. He turned around very slowly, and the mask of casual indifference on his face was replaced by a look of authentic curiosity. "Who was it that taught you that?" "My father," she answered. The lie felt more natural this time, even though it was built around a piece of truth she had not dared to speak for many years. He was a structural engineer. A structural engineer who educated his daughter on the finer points of breaching a reinforced penthouse suite. Lorenzo approached her, holding out the glass of whiskey he had just poured. "Drink this. You look as though you are about to vibrate right out of your own skin." Harper accepted the glass but made no move to drink from it. She held it as if it were a weapon. I never drink when I am on the job. You have not accepted the job yet, he pointed out. I do not really have a choice in the matter, do I? Harper's eyes narrowed slightly. You mentioned Naples. You said that they know who I am. Lorenzo perched on the edge of his enormous mahogany desk, casually crossing one ankle over the other. My associates in Italy forwarded me a screenshot taken from the video. The Camorra never forgets a face, Harper. Or would you prefer I call you Alicia? The name struck her with the force of a physical impact. Harper's grip on the whiskey glass tightened until her knuckles were bone white. Alicia. She had not been called by that name in 4 long years. Not since the evening the car was consumed by fire. Not since she had frantically scrubbed her father's blood from her hands in the restroom of a gas station in Lyon and transformed herself into Harper Caroline. Alicia Rossi, Lorenzo went on, his voice becoming a smooth, menacing baritone, the daughter of Marco Rossi, who was the Camorra's most trusted accountant. The very man who laundered over 3 billion euros in drug profits and then disappeared with 50 million of it. He did not just disappear, Harper said, her voice shaking with a deep fury she fought hard to control. They murdered him. They burned him to death inside his own car. But they never located the money, Lorenzo countered smoothly. And they never located his daughter. That is until yesterday, when she made the decision to become a global internet celebrity over a simple cup of espresso. Harper placed the glass down on a nearby side table with a sharp, definitive click. She then reached a hand behind her back. The 2 bodyguards positioned by the elevator immediately grew tense, their hands moving instinctively toward their weapons. But Lorenzo simply held up a hand, ordering them to stand down. Harper did not draw a weapon. She pulled out a simple hair tie. She skillfully gathered her long brown hair and tied it back, revealing the sharp, defined line of her jaw and a long, ragged scar that ran from just below her ear down to her collarbone. It was a permanent reminder from the explosion that had taken her father's life. My father did not steal that money, she explained, and her voice had changed completely. The meek waitress was entirely gone. Standing in her place was a woman who was raised under the shadow of Mount Vesuvius, a woman who learned to count stacks of cash before she even knew how to read. He tried to use the money as leverage to get us out of that life. They discovered his plan, and they killed him for it. I killed the 2 men they dispatched to find me. I grabbed whatever cash I could find in the safe, and I ran. Lorenzo studied her intently. He could see it clearly now. He saw it in her posture, in the cold, precise way she assessed everything around her. She was not a soldier. She was exiled royalty, a Mafia princess who had been forced to become a hardened warrior just to stay alive. If the Camorra knows that I am here, Harper stated, they will not just send local thugs. They will send a team of specialists. If I stay here with you, I will bring a war straight to your front door. I am already engaged in a war, Lorenzo replied, with a dismissive wave of his hand. The Russian Bratva is making a push on my northern territories. The local street gangs are getting bolder, like those fools in the restaurant you handled. I need a decisive advantage. You possess a mind that is perfectly suited for this life, Alicia. I recognized it the moment I saw that video. You have the ice. The ice. It was a term for complete emotional detachment when facing the possibility of death. It was a quality that could never be taught. Lorenzo stood and walked until he was standing just a few inches away from her. He smelled of expensive cologne and the faint, sharp scent of gunpowder. I am offering you a trade. You will help me resolve my problems, beginning with that shipment next week, and in return, I will use the full power and influence of the Moretti family to shield you from Naples. I will make you a ghost once more. Harper looked up to meet his gaze. His eyes were dark, powerful, and demanding. For the very first time in years, she experienced a flicker of an emotion other than constant fear. She felt seen. I have some conditions, she said. Name them, he replied. I will not carry a weapon that I have not personally cleaned and inspected. I will not sleep in any room that has only one way out. And if you ever lay a hand on me without my express permission, I will cut your throat while you are sleeping." A genuine smile spread across Lorenzo's face. It was sharp and utterly terrifying. "Deal," he said. "Welcome to the family, Harper. We should keep that name for the time being. It is much safer." The phase of preparation was agonizingly slow and meticulous. Lorenzo was not a man who ever rushed anything. He was the kind of man who preferred to suffocate his opponents with overwhelming attention to detail. For the following 3 days, Harper was confined to a secure room located deep within the spire. She was not exactly a prisoner, but she was certainly not a free woman. She passed the long hours by meticulously studying the extensive dossier that Marcus, the consigliere, had provided for her. The shipment did not contain drugs. It contained diamonds. They were uncut, conflict-free stones, arriving from a trusted broker in Sierra Leone, which were intended to be laundered through the Moretti family's legitimate jewelry businesses. The exchange was scheduled for Friday evening at the Port of Chicago, specifically at Terminal 4. Harper sat at a massive glass conference table, surrounded by detailed blueprints of the entire shipping terminal. Marcus stood a short distance away, observing her with a watchful eye. A feeling of deep skepticism settled over her. "This is the wrong place," Harper said in a low voice. Her red marker moved like a surgeon's scalpel across the blueprint. Marcus immediately grew defensive. "The location is completely standard. We have total control of the union workers at Terminal 4. Nobody gets in or out without our approval. The entire area is secure." "It is not secure. It is a funnel," Harper countered without even glancing up. "Just look at how the container stacks are arranged. They force any vehicle into a single narrow lane. If the seller has any intention of ambushing you, they just drop a crane at this intersection. You would be completely trapped inside a kill box." "Who picked this spot?" "It was the broker, Solomon Vane." The red marker stopped moving. Harper lifted her head and stared directly at Marcus. "Solomon Vane is not a broker. He is a weapon for hire. My father contracted him for a single transport job in Marles years ago, and we learned his true nature. Vane works for whoever pays the most, period. If he was the one who selected this terminal, then he is absolutely selling you to your enemies." Marcus's face tightened with doubt. "That cannot be right. We have worked with that man for the last 5 years without a single problem." "People change," Harper stated, her voice devoid of any warmth. "I need you to check his financials right now. Search his accounts for any large deposits from the Vulov family. Look specifically within the past 48 hours. For a moment, Marcus just stood there. But then he took out his tablet. His fingers flew across the screen for several minutes. Suddenly, all the color drained from his face. He found something. "There is an offshore transfer," Marcus said, his voice a horrified whisper. "It came from the Cayman Islands. $2 million. The transaction was finalized yesterday." The air in the room became heavy and still. Harper simply leaned back in her chair, slowly spinning the red marker between her fingers. She had only been officially working for him for 2 days, a total of 48 hours, and in that time she had unquestionably saved Lorenzo's life. When Lorenzo walked into the office 10 minutes later, having already received the briefing from a visibly shaken Marcus, his entire perception of Harper had shifted. The simple curiosity that was in his eyes before had been replaced by something else entirely. It was a look of genuine respect. "You were correct," Lorenzo said, his voice low and serious. "Vane arranged a trap for us. The Russians are already in position, waiting for our arrival at Terminal 4. Then we call it off," Marcus proposed, his relief obvious. "We cancel the meet." "No." Lorenzo's voice was as hard as steel. "We do not cancel. We will not project weakness. If we fail to appear, Vulov will assume that we are afraid. We are going." "But that is a suicide mission," Marcus protested, his voice cracking. "It is only suicide if we play by their rules," Lorenzo replied, turning his full attention to Harper. "You were the one who saw their trap. So tell me, how do we use it against them? Harper pushed herself to her feet and moved back to the blueprint spread across the table. She felt a familiar, powerful surge of adrenaline course through her veins. This was her element. The intricate planning, the careful strategy, this deadly ballet was coded into her very being. She had tried to bury that part of herself under a mountain of coffee orders and restaurant designs, but it was an inescapable part of her DNA. "We will not use the main entrance," Harper began, her finger tracing a new route along the edge of the water. "We will approach by sea, using small, quiet zodiacs. Our teams will be inserted here, on top of the cranes, well before the scheduled meeting. When Vane and the Russians make their move, our men will deliver overwhelming fire from high ground. We will transform their perfect kill box into our own." Lorenzo just stared at her, completely captivated. There was no denying her beauty, but in this moment, as she discussed fields of fire and tactical insertion points, she was utterly magnificent. "And what about me?" Lorenzo finally asked. "What is my role in this?" "You are the bait," Harper answered, looking him directly in the eye. "You will have to put your life in my hands." "I trust you," Lorenzo responded without hesitation. The gravity of his words seemed to fill the entire room. On Friday night, the port of Chicago felt like a massive tombstone made of rusting steel and crusted salt. A thick, chilling fog drifted in from Lake Michigan, blanketing everything. The mist was so dense it almost completely hid the massive stacks of shipping containers. Harper wore tactical gear that she had acquired from the Moretti family armory. It consisted of black cargo pants, a form-fitting Kevlar vest, and a communications earpiece for secure contact. She was not on the boat with the assault team. Instead, she was on the ground, carefully disguised as just another one of Lorenzo's regular bodyguards. Her long hair was concealed beneath a beanie, and a high collar shielded most of her face from view. She had insisted on staying close to the principal. She had to be near Lorenzo. He stood waiting in a wide, open space between two towering rows of containers. He had on a long wool coat, making sure his hands were clearly visible. Two of his cars were positioned behind him with their engines idling. In front of him stood Solomon Vane, who was holding a metal briefcase. "Lorenzo!" Vane greeted him with a wide smile, his teeth looking yellow under the harsh glare of the floodlights. "I see you are on time." "I prefer to conclude my business efficiently," Lorenzo replied, his tone perfectly calm. "Did you bring the diamonds?" "Naturally." Harper's eyes swept the entire area. She was not paying attention to their conversation. Instead, she was focused on the deep shadows. She was watching the top edges of the containers, exactly where she had placed Moretti's best snipers. "Check your six," she murmured into the microphone hidden in her lapel. "On the east side, third container from the end. I see a reflection." Lorenzo gave no outward sign that he heard, but he subtly shifted his stance. Without any warning, the floodlights went out, plunging the entire area into absolute darkness. "Now!" Harper yelled into her comms. A single gunshot echoed through the night air, but it did not come from Vane. It came from the shadows. The bullet sparked against the asphalt, missing Lorenzo's foot by only a few inches. "Ambush!" Vane shouted as he dove for the nearest cover, playing his part in the deception perfectly. A new set of floodlights suddenly flashed on, this time from the Russian position, completely blinding Lorenzo's men. Figures carrying automatic rifles began pouring out from behind the containers on the northern side of the clearing. It was the beginning of a slaughter. But Harper had planned for the lights. "Take them out!" she commanded over the radio. Her sniper positioned on the crane fired, and the Russian floodlights shattered instantly. The container yard was once again consumed by darkness. "Engage!" Lorenzo commanded, pulling his own firearm. The scene erupted into pure chaos. The Moretti soldiers, all equipped with the night vision goggles that Harper had demanded, began firing with deadly accuracy. The Russians, now completely blind and disoriented, were firing wildly into the shadows. Harper was on the move. She did not retreat from the danger. She ran directly toward Lorenzo. He was taking cover behind a large forklift, exchanging shots with the enemy. "We need to move now," she yelled to be heard over the intense gunfire, grabbing onto his arm. "They have a heavy machine gunner positioned on that ridge. How can you be sure?" "I can hear the sound of the belt feed." She pulled him down low, guiding him through the labyrinth of metal containers with a profound, instinctual knowledge of the layout she had memorized from the blueprints. A stream of bullets tore through the ground at the very spot where they had been standing just moments before. They found a small opening between two massive containers. Harper forcefully pushed Lorenzo into the tight space, then pressed her own body against his, using herself as a shield. They were pressed together, chest to chest, their breathing heavy and ragged. The terrifying sounds of the battle raged just inches from where they stood. For a brief moment, everything seemed to slow down. Lorenzo looked down at her. Her eyes were wide and sharp, constantly scanning the darkness over his shoulder. She was absolutely fierce. "You are very good at this," he whispered, the rush of adrenaline making his voice sound raw and deep. "You can save the compliments for later," she snapped back, quickly checking the magazine on her pistol. "We are not safe yet. Vane is getting away. He has the diamonds, and he has your money. Let him run. What matters is that we survived this." "No," Harper said firmly. "We never let traitors escape. That is something my father taught me." She suddenly broke away from Lorenzo's side, sprinting out into the open and toward the edge of the water. Vane was frantically scrambling to get onto a speedboat that was waiting for him. "Harper, no!" Lorenzo yelled after her, but she paid him no attention. She dropped down to one knee on the slick, wet concrete, raised her pistol with both hands, and took a steadying breath. The boat was about 50 yards out, rocking in the turbulent water. Vane was struggling to untie the mooring rope. Harper did not take aim at the man. She aimed for the engine block. She fired 2 precise shots. The outboard motor gave off a shower of sparks and then went silent. Vane let out a scream of pure frustration, yanking uselessly on the starter cord. Harper slowly rose to her feet, the pistol still smoking by her side. Within seconds, Lorenzo's men had swarmed the boat and surrounded Vane. Lorenzo came to a stop just behind her. The sound of the firefight was finally fading away as the remaining Russians were either retreating or had been killed. He looked from the crippled boat back to Harper. She turned to face him, the rain soaking her hair and plastering it to her face. She looked utterly exhausted, but she was alive, and she was victorious. "You missed him," Lorenzo observed, raising an eyebrow. "I was not trying to hit him," Harper answered, holstering her weapon. "I need him alive. He can tell us who hired him. He knows the exact locations where the Vulovs are hiding." Lorenzo reached up with his hand and gently brushed a wet piece of hair away from her cheek. His hand lingered for a moment on her jawline. The gesture felt incredibly intimate, a silent mix of possession and tenderness. "You are a very dangerous woman, Harper," he said softly. "I tried to tell you," she whispered back. Her heart was pounding violently in her chest, but it was not from the chase. It was from his touch. "I am not a waitress." Lorenzo's thumb gently grazed across her lower lip. "No," he said. "You are the queen." The intense adrenaline from the fight at the docks had now been replaced by the quiet, sterile, fluorescent buzz of the basement located deep beneath the spire. Deep below the spire was a cold basement, a place reserved for the kind of Moretti family business that could never be conducted over coffee. In the center of the stark, concrete space, Solomon Vane was held captive. Heavy plastic ties dug deep into his wrists, securing him tightly to a hard steel chair. His expensive tailored suit was now just a ruined piece of cloth, smeared with motor oil and dark patches of his own blood. A fresh, painful cut on his lip served as a reminder of Marcus's temper during the drive. Lorenzo stalked the edges of the room, his every movement radiating the fury of a caged predator. He had already discarded his coat and pushed his sleeves high, showing off powerful forearms covered in intricate tattoos. His anger was a palpable force in the air, aimed not only at the treachery, but even more so at the terrible risk Harper had chosen to take. Marcus wiped his knuckles on a dirty piece of cloth. "He is refusing to cooperate," he said flatly. "He insists he only accepted the job and has no idea who the real client was." Lorenzo's response was a low, dangerous growl. "He is lying." He walked over to a workbench, and his hand closed around a large, heavy wrench. "The man clearly believes that keeping his mouth shut is worth more than being able to walk." A clear voice cut through the tension. "Stop." Harper had been standing silently against the massive steel door. She was still dressed in her operational gear, her face smudged with black soot from the earlier fight. She pushed herself away from the cold wall and stepped forward into the single pool of light. "You are about to go too far and shatter him," Harper said, her tone perfectly calm. "And if you do that, he becomes useless for identifying the weapons shipment." "I do not give a damn about bank transfers," Lorenzo snapped back at her. "All I want from him is the name of his Russian contact." "The contact was not Russian," Harper stated plainly. She approached Vane and stood directly in front of him, stopping just inches from his face. She did not raise her voice. She made no threats. She simply looked at him with that chillingly empty expression. It was the same look the waitress had while a gun was pointed at her face. "Solomon," she began, her voice unexpectedly soft. "You keep glancing at your watch every 30 seconds. You are not waiting for a rescue party to arrive. You are waiting for a wire transfer to be completed." Vane blinked rapidly. A single drop of sweat traced a path down his temple. "I have no idea what you are talking about." "You received 50% of your payment up front," Harper continued, her voice a calm, analytical monotone. "The second half is released automatically upon confirmation of Lorenzo's death. That is the real reason you are refusing to talk. You believe that if you can stall for long enough, the news of the shootout will get out. Your client will assume that Lorenzo is dead, and the final payment will be deposited into your offshore account. Only then will you decide to cooperate." Vane's eyes widened in shock and fear. In a matter of seconds, she had completely unraveled his entire desperate strategy. Harper leaned even closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But I have already checked the news, Solomon. We are the ones controlling the story. The official report is already running on Channel 5 right now." The story they were selling was not about a professional hit. Instead, the official report would claim a sudden gas leak caused a catastrophic explosion down at the docks. Crucially, no bodies were ever recovered. Your client is convinced that you failed them, that you botched the entire operation. They are absolutely not going to pay you a single dime. Vane sagged deep into the chair, every ounce of resistance draining from his body. This cold, inescapable logic broke him more thoroughly than the wrench ever could have. "It was not Vulov," Vane whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "Who was it then?" Lorenzo demanded, moving forward until his large shadow completely engulfed the broken man. "It was someone from Zurich," Vane choked out. "He never offered a name, but he authenticated the transfer of funds using an old Camorra confirmation code. He was very specific in asking for the woman. He ordered me to kill Moretti, but he insisted I capture the girl alive." Harper's entire body went rigid. "Capture the girl alive. Zurich," she breathed, the very name of the city seeming to steal the warmth and color from her face. Lorenzo noticed the profound change in her instantly. He gave a sharp, subtle signal to Marcus. "Get him out of this room now. Take him down and secure him in the holding cell." As Marcus began to haul the weeping, defeated broker from the room, Lorenzo focused all his attention on Harper. The space around them suddenly felt heavy and profoundly quiet. "What is so important about Zurich, Harper?" She instinctively folded her arms across her chest, a defensive posture he had never witnessed from her before, a clear gesture of self-preservation. "My father's emergency backup accounts are there," she said. "The ones he promised me were completely empty." "You believe he might still be alive?" Lorenzo asked, taking a careful step toward her. "I was there. I saw the body," she murmured, her voice trembling with the memory. It had been burned so badly it was beyond any real recognition. But the vehicle was his, and his watch was on the wrist of the corpse. I was the one who buried him. If he is truly dead, Lorenzo reasoned, gently reaching out to steady her trembling hands with his own, then it must mean that someone else has access to his private codes. It is someone who desperately wants you brought back to Italy, and it appears they are using the Russians to handle their messy work for them. He gently pulled her toward him. The tactical vest he wore was a hard and unyielding surface between their bodies, but the intense warmth that radiated from him was powerful and undeniable. He looked down at her, and for the first time, he was not seeing the brilliant strategist, but the vulnerable woman beneath all that armor. "You are shaking," he observed in a soft voice. "I am furious," she corrected, her gaze lifting to meet his directly. Her eyes were glistening with unshed tears, but her expression was utterly fierce. "I spent 4 long years of my life mourning that man. I dedicated 4 years to running and hiding because of the consequences of his mistakes. If some person is now using his ghost to come after me, then we will simply have to kill the ghost," Lorenzo concluded for her, his tone final. He slowly raised one hand and brushed his thumb across the dark smudge of soot on her cheek, gently wiping away the grime. His touch felt like an electric current against her skin. Harper's breath caught in her throat. For one fleeting moment in that dim concrete basement, the impenetrable wall she kept around herself completely ceased to exist. There was only the powerful, gravitational pull between the two of them. "You need to get some rest," Lorenzo said, his voice dropping to a husky murmur. "The mayor's annual charity ball is tomorrow evening." Harper pulled away from him, her mind reeling with confusion. "We are attending a party now? We are going to make a powerful statement," Lorenzo clarified, a hard glint appearing in his eyes. "The entire city believes we suffered a major blow down at the docks. The Russians are convinced that we are now vulnerable and weak. Therefore, we are going to walk directly into the most significant social event of the entire year, right through the front doors. I need them to see us together. More importantly, I need them to see you." "Me?" she asked, bewildered. "I am just part of the staff." "Not any longer," Lorenzo stated firmly. "Tomorrow night, you will not be acting as the bodyguard. You will be my date." The grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hotel was a glittering ocean of expensive tuxedos and breathtaking designer gowns. A professional string quartet was playing Mozart, their beautiful music drifting delicately above the persistent low roar of high society gossip and the constant chiming of champagne flutes. Every single major power player in the city of Chicago was in attendance. There were politicians and judges, powerful union leaders, and of course, the very gangsters who secretly owned every single one of them. At the very top of the magnificent marble staircase, Lorenzo Moretti finally made his appearance. He was dressed in a custom tuxedo of midnight blue that seemed to fit him as perfectly as a second skin. He looked exactly like the undisputed king of Chicago's underworld. But the entire room did not fall silent because of him. It fell silent for the astonishing woman who was on his arm. Harper Caroline was wearing a gown made of pure crimson silk, a bold and violent slash of color in a room dominated by black and white. The dress was daringly backless, intentionally revealing the faint jagged scar on her shoulder blade. This was a deliberate and calculated choice. She wore absolutely no jewelry, no distracting diamonds or pearls. Her dark hair was left unbound, cascading down her back in loose, natural waves. She appeared to be incredibly dangerous. She looked absolutely regal. "Just breathe," Lorenzo whispered very close to her ear as they began their descent down the grand staircase. "Every single eye in this entire room is fixed on you." "I am aware," Harper murmured back, a perfectly practiced and charming smile locked onto her face. "I am currently counting all of the exits. There are 4 main doors. I can see 2 service elevators located behind the main bar. Snipers would most likely be positioned on the mezzanine level. Stop working right now." Lorenzo gently squeezed her hand where it rested on his arm. "For just the next 5 minutes, I need you to just be here with me. They moved together through the dense crowd like a pair of sharks gliding through a coral reef. People instinctively parted to let them pass. Lorenzo introduced her to everyone simply as Harper, offering absolutely no further explanation for who she was or why the city's most famously eligible bachelor had decided to bring a former waitress to the most exclusive event of the season. But the insidious whispers trailed them everywhere they went. Is that the woman from that security video? The Ice Queen. They arrived at the very center of the large dance floor just as the music swelled into a classic waltz. Lorenzo smoothly turned her to face him, his hand resting firmly on the small of her back. I do not dance, Harper said, her body stiff and unyielding as he started to confidently lead her. You seem to do everything else in your life perfectly, Lorenzo countered, his intense gaze locking with hers. I have a strong suspicion that you do this perfectly as well. He turned out to be correct. Her body still remembered the countless lessons from her childhood, the formal etiquette classes her father had once paid for using his blood money. She began to move with an effortless grace, her brilliant red dress swirling beautifully around his dark, powerful legs. You look so beautiful, Alicia, he whispered, using her true name in a public space for the very first time, though his voice was low enough that only she was able to hear it. Do not call me that, she warned him, even though her grip on his shoulder instinctively tightened. The person named Alicia is dead and gone. Not to me, he replied. For that one perfect moment, the entire world seemed to shrink until it contained only the two of them. Lorenzo spun her gracefully, and for the first time in so many years, Harper felt completely and utterly safe. She felt truly seen. She then realized with a sudden jolt of sheer panic that she was falling deeply in love with the dangerous monster who had originally hired her. And then the music stopped, but not because the song had reached its end. It stopped because the main doors to the grand ballroom were suddenly thrown wide open with a startlingly loud bang. All of the chatter and conversation died away in an instant. Standing dramatically in the doorway was not a police tactical squad, nor was it a Russian hit team. It was just a single man. He was tall and lean, dressed in a sharp white suit that stood out with aggressive confidence. He had slicked back black hair and a face that was handsome in a very cruel and sharp-featured way. He was flanked on either side by four men who did not look like common Chicago thugs. They looked like ancient Roman statues brought to life, complete with modern earpieces. Harper froze completely in Lorenzo's arms. Her blood felt as though it had turned to solid ice in her veins. Who is that? Lorenzo asked, feeling the sudden, rigid tension in her body. Dante, Harper whispered, her voice so faint it was nearly inaudible. That is Dante Romano, from the Camorra, my fiancé, she breathed, the words tasting like poison. He is the man I was supposed to marry the very same week that I died. Dante Romano strode into the opulent room with the kind of boundless arrogance that belongs to a man who believes he owns the very air that other people breathe. He completely ignored the collective gasps from the crowd. He paid no attention to the approaching security guards. He walked in a straight line directly toward the center of the dance floor, his cold eyes locked firmly onto Harper. Lorenzo immediately stepped in front of Harper, physically shielding her with his own body. His right hand disappeared inside his jacket, finding the familiar grip of his gun. You are a very long way from Naples, my friend, Lorenzo said, his powerful voice projecting clearly across the now silent room. Dante came to a stop about 5 feet away from them. He smiled, but the expression was cold and did not reach his eyes. And you, Mr. Moretti, possess something that belongs to me. A chilling injustice hung in the air. Harper is not an object, Lorenzo countered, his entire body coiled like a spring, ready for violence. And she is with me now. Dante released a dry, hollow laugh. His eyes bypassed Lorenzo, fixing directly on Harper with a predatory gaze. Harper? Dante's voice dripped with scorn. Is that the name you are using these days? Amore, my love. After you abandoned me at the altar, After you forced us all to bury an empty box, Harper finally stepped out from behind Lorenzo's protective shadow. She had to confront this demon herself. Go home, Dante. There is nothing left for you in this place. I cannot return with nothing, Dante replied, his hand moving slowly toward his coat pocket. In an instant, Lorenzo's bodyguards had their hands on their firearms, ready for the inevitable. But what he produced was not a weapon. Instead, Dante only retrieved a single, neatly folded piece of paper. I carry a message, he announced, from a shared acquaintance in Zurich. He extended the paper toward her. Harper felt a tremor of fear, but forced herself to take it. Her hands were unsteady as she carefully unfolded the note, the paper crinkling in the tense silence. The script was handwritten. It was a handwriting she knew intimately, a ghost from her past. For 20 years, she had seen that same writing on birthday cards and school reports. Alicia, come home. The accounts have been frozen until we can be together again. I miss you, Papa. The entire world seemed to lurch violently. The solid ground beneath her feet felt like it was dissolving into nothing. He is alive, she managed to whisper, the sheer horror of the revelation stealing the air from her lungs. He really is alive and well. Of course he is, Dante said, his voice smooth as silk as he took another step closer, completely ignoring the lethal threat posed by Lorenzo. Marco never actually died in that explosion. He orchestrated the entire car bomb incident himself to eliminate the hitmen that had been sent after him. He willingly sacrificed your identity and your entire life simply to save his own skin. He has been living a life of absolute luxury for the past 4 years, just waiting for all the danger to subside. But now he finds he needs his beloved daughter. Or to be more precise, he needs your retinal scan in order to access the final $10 million. Harper looked up at him, tears now streaming freely down her face. Not tears of sadness, but of a pure, undiluted, and overwhelming sense of betrayal. Her father had not died while trying to protect her. He had allowed her to believe she was a lonely orphan in a dangerous world. He let her scrape by in poverty and live in constant fear, all so he could eventually use her like a simple key to open a safe deposit box. He sold you out completely, Alasia, Dante said, extending his open hand to her in a gesture of invitation. Come along with me now. We will travel to Zurich together. We will retrieve the money from the bank, and then we can finally be a proper family again. Lorenzo looked over at Harper. He saw the absolute devastation that had shattered her eyes. He knew with cold certainty that if she went with Dante, she would be dead the very instant that safe was opened. Do not touch her, Lorenzo warned, once again moving to stand between them. This time, he fully drew his handgun. A wave of terrified gasps rippled through the ballroom. People started to scream. Put the gun away, Moretti, Dante sneered dismissively. This is a private family matter. This is Camorra business. She is not part of the Camorra, Lorenzo snarled, and the loud click of his gun's safety being disengaged echoed ominously in the sudden, deep silence. She is a Moretti. Dante's condescending smile finally vanished from his face. Is that meant to be a formal declaration of war? No, Lorenzo answered, his eyes blazing with a raw, protective fury that was so intense it even stunned Harper. Consider it an eviction notice. I want you out of my city immediately. If you are not on an airplane within the next hour, I promise you will not be leaving this city in anything other than a body bag. Dante's gaze shifted from Lorenzo to the tightening ring of Moretti soldiers who were now closing in around the entire perimeter of the grand ballroom. He quickly understood that he was completely outgunned. Very well, Dante said, taking a moment to smoothly adjust the cuffs of his expensive suit jacket. He spared one final, lingering look at Harper. This is not over, Alicia. You should know that your father is a very impatient man. And you remember what always happens when Marco starts to get impatient, do you not? With that final threat hanging in the air, Dante turned and walked away, his men instantly forming a protective phalanx around him as they retreated. The enormous ballroom was now utterly and completely silent. Every single guest was staring at the tense trio left standing in the center of the floor. Harper stood there, completely paralyzed, the crumpled note still clutched tightly in her fist. Her entire life, everything she had believed, was a complete and total lie. Her own father was the true villain of her story. She felt her knees begin to buckle beneath her. She fully expected to feel the painful impact of the hard marble floor. Instead, she found herself falling directly into Lorenzo's strong and steady arms. The air inside the Zurich bunker's vault was somehow even more frigid than the snow-covered city streets outside. Every wall was lined with flawless panels of brushed steel, creating a sterile, unwelcoming environment. The atmosphere itself felt heavy, thick with the sharp smell of ozone and the unmistakable scent of immense wealth. Harper stood completely still before the enormous circular door. Inside her chest, she could feel her heart beating wildly, like a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Despite the storm raging inside her, her face was a mask of pure ice. Just behind her, Lorenzo stood as a silent, imposing guardian. His hand rested with deliberate casualness near the firearm he kept concealed beneath his long trench coat, a silent promise of swift violence. Positioned on the opposite side of the grand room, an old man sat in a wheelchair, with Dante and his other enforcers standing guard on both sides. To an outsider, he might have looked fragile, perhaps even pathetic in his advanced age. Harper, however, knew the truth. That man was Marco Rossi, a venomous snake who had simply adopted a harmless new skin. Alicia! Marco's face broke into a broad smile, but his eyes shone with a sickening combination of selfish pride and insatiable greed. My wonderful girl, you look exactly like your mother. Harper's reply was immediate and sharp, slicing through the tense silence like a razor's edge. Do not even speak her name. Her voice was filled with cold fury. You let me believe you were dead. You let me struggle and starve in Chicago while you were hiding away with millions of dollars in the Caymans. I did it all for us, Marco pleaded, his voice a weak wheeze as he propelled his wheelchair closer to her. I needed the danger to pass, for everyone to forget. Now, with the scan of your retina, we can finally access the master account. We can disappear forever. Just the two of us, cara mia, my dear. And me, Dante interrupted, taking a confident step forward. His firearm was drawn but pointed harmlessly at the polished floor. You must not forget the person who brokered this family reunion. Lorenzo moved immediately, his body creating a physical barrier to shield Harper. The only thing you ever broker, Dante, is your own funeral. Stop, Harper commanded, her voice ringing with authority. She looked at Lorenzo, her eyes conveying a silent message. I must do this. With a deep breath, she walked toward the retinal scanner. The complex machine hummed to life as she approached. A thin green laser moved across her eye, meticulously tracing the unique and intricate pattern of her retina. Identity confirmed, a calm, automated voice declared. Alicia Rossi. The heavy, complex tumblers of the massive vault door began to click and turn with a deafening series of mechanical sounds. Marco leaned forward in his chair, his anticipation so intense he was practically drooling. Dante flashed a triumphant grin, slowly raising his weapon to take aim at Lorenzo, fully prepared to eliminate his competition the very second the money was within his grasp. Accessing funds, the synthetic voice announced. Transfer has been initiated. Yes, Marco hissed, his voice trembling with greed. Transfer everything to the Cayman account. Negative, the voice replied, its tone flat and final. All funds have been transferred to the Caritas International Orphanage Fund, Naples Division. The account balance is now 0. The silence that fell over the room was absolute and suffocating. What have you done? Marco whispered, his face contorting as it turned a dark purplish shade of rage. I simply changed the routing number, Harper explained calmly, turning to face the men who had wronged her. You wanted my eyes to open this vault, Papa. You have them. But you will never get the money. You stole every last dollar of that fortune from the people of Naples. I have only just returned it to them. You stupid girl, Dante screamed, violently raising his gun to fire. He never completed the action. Crack! Crack! Lorenzo moved with impossible speed. Two precise shots from his silenced pistol struck Dante squarely in the chest. The rival boss crumpled onto the expensive Swiss carpet, a lifeless heap before his body even hit the floor. Marco's bodyguards instinctively raised their weapons, but the room was suddenly filled with the tiny, menacing red dots of laser sights. Lorenzo's highly trained team had successfully breached the bunker's perimeter minutes before. "It is finished, Marco," Lorenzo said, calmly holstering his weapon. He did not give the dead body of Dante a single glance. "The local police are 5 minutes away from this location. I would strongly suggest you begin practicing your confession and your plea deal." Harper looked at her father for the last time. He was sobbing uncontrollably, not for the daughter he had almost lost forever, but for the immense fortune he could no longer possess. At that moment, she felt the very last connection to her painful past break apart and disappear. She was finally free. She walked right past him, moving toward the open vault door where the snowy Zurich afternoon was waiting for her. Lorenzo fell into step right beside her as she walked out. Outside, the air felt crisp, cold, and wonderfully clean. The adrenaline that had sustained her began to recede, leaving Harper trembling from the ordeal. Lorenzo stopped, gently pulling her toward him, and wrapped his heavy, warm coat around her small shoulders. "You gave away $50 million, Lorenzo murmured, his voice filled with awe as he looked down at her. "It was blood money," Harper whispered, burying her face into the solid warmth of his chest. "I never wanted it. I just want a life, a normal, real life." Lorenzo used his hand to lift her chin, his thumb gently brushing against her lip. "You have a life with me. No more hiding, Harper. No more Ice Queen. You are just the queen." He then kissed her, a fiery promise of absolute protection and deep passion there in the softly falling snow. The timid waitress who once tried to disappear into the background was gone for good. In her place now stood a powerful woman who had brought kings and crime lords to their knees, a woman who was ready to command the empire she had rightfully won. And that is how the legend of the Ice Queen was truly born, not from some viral video, but from the silent, powerful empire she constructed in the city's shadows. Harper Caroline did not just survive a robbery on that fateful night in Chicago. She used that traumatic event to seize control and reclaim her own destiny. She proved to everyone that the most dangerous weapon in the world is not a gun or a knife. It is the brilliant mind of a woman who has absolutely nothing left to lose. In Harper, Lorenzo Moretti found something more than a partner. He finally found his true equal. Together, they began to rule the city of Chicago, not through fear and violence, but with a terrifying and unbreakable calm that unnerved all their rivals. The quiet waitress was a memory. Long live the queen. What a journey that was. From a humble little bistro to a deadly shootout in a Swiss vault, Harper's incredible story demonstrates that sometimes the most silent people are the ones you should fear the most. What would you have done with the $50 million? Would you have taken the money for yourself? Or would you have given it all away, just like Harper did? Let me know what you think in the comments section below. If you love this intricate story of mafia romance and revenge, please do me a favor and smash that like button. It really makes a huge difference for the channel. Please do not forget to subscribe and be sure to hit the notification bell so that you never miss a new story. Go ahead and share this video with a friend who you think needs a little bit more drama in their life. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful lessons and real emotional value to our audience.